can to stay safe at work. And most days, as we go about our routine everyday duties, it's all plain sailing, as we try and do the right thing. However, there is always a risk that things can go wrong. And in the blink of an eye, life can change dramatically. We all try to do everything we can to stay safe. We all try to take care of our equipment, ensuring that it is well maintained and operating safely. Yet despite this, we still experience failure of equipment, which cause incidents, often with severe consequences. Some recent incidents of equipment failure include the failure of an activation locking device on an incinerator door, resulting in an engineer suffering third-degree burns to his hand. And the tank valves and high-level alarm failed during fuel transfers from one tank to another, causing fuel oil to overflow and spill. Although equipment may fail, we always endeavour to have multiple checks and procedures in place to prevent such incidents. They are known as barriers. They can be human barriers, procedural barriers, and physical barriers. For barriers to work, they need to be maintained, and for someone to be responsible for them at all times. Unfortunately, when a combination of barriers fails, as depicted by this diagram, an incident can occur, with potentially devastating consequences. In the industry incident that follows, which has been recreated using vessel volunteer staff, we will look at the failed barriers that should have been in place and look at what caused them to fail, so that together we can ensure that an incident like this does not happen again. The second engineer had been tasked by the chief engineer to fix a leaking coupling on the main engine. He is busy checking the stock records, looking for a spare, when the fitter arrives.
The chief engineer wants this leaky coupling on the main engine.
The second engineer explained to the fitter that he couldn't find a spare coupling on board, so he wanted him to try tightening the coupling instead, as a temporary measure.
Are you sure to tighten it?
Yeah, you can try.
And what about permit to work?
Yeah.
The fitter inquired about a permit to work, but one was not issued, as there was an existing permit to work open in the area, as another task was being performed on the same unit. The fitter went to collect the appropriate tools for the job, but the torque wrench was missing. So he took an adjustable wrench instead and went off to tighten the coupling. The fitter finished his work and left the engine room. When we last saw the incident, the fitter had tightened the coupling, but had not noticed the loose clamps on the brackets supporting the same fuel oil line. However, he did see the missing insulation on the exhaust bellows, but decided not to do anything about it, as another engineer had been tasked to work on that part of the engine. The second engineer was satisfied that the work was completed and went on with his own work. Later that day, the engine was restarted. However, a few hours later, the fuel oil line, which was vibrating, eventually sheared at the place where the fitter had tightened the coupling. This allowed fuel oil from the line to spray directly onto the hot, exposed part of the exhaust bellows, which were around 400 degrees Celsius. This caused a flash fire, which quickly spread. The fire alarm was activated, and the second engineer, who was working in the control room at the time, wanted to quickly investigate the source of the fire, but became engulfed by the smoke before he could evacuate.
Okay guys, let's see who is here.
As the fire intensified, the ship's crew went to the emergency muster point.
Okay.
It was urgently decided to send a two-man crew to the engine room to try and locate and rescue the second engineer. The two men entered the engine room. But only one returned. With continued firefighting, the fire was eventually brought under control. The bodies of the two men were later found in the completely burned-out engine room. The families of the two men were subsequently advised of the loss of their loved ones. Let us pause for a moment and reflect on all the lives that have been lost while working. From the work you've just finished, you've probably identified several areas where either you or your team can improve on minimizing failure of equipment. Let's now look back and analyze the incident to see what caused the barriers to fail, so that a tragic incident like this never happens again. We will pay particular attention to the human element. Failings due to actions that humans either did or did not take. The unscheduled work was not managed appropriately. There was no effective toolbox talk, risk assessment, or hazard identification. An unscheduled permit to work was considered unnecessary. The wrong tool was used to tighten the coupling, leading to over-tightening. The clamps on the bracket supporting the fuel oil line were not checked to ensure they were holding the fuel oil line securely. The insulation had not been reinstated so as to check that the repairs were completed correctly when the main engine was restarted. No one took ownership of the issue. The fitter did not intervene when he saw the insulation was missing on the exhaust bellows. The second engineer did not take time to oversee the activities in the engine room and ensure that the work tasks were completed properly. The second engineer unsuccessfully investigated the growing fire rather than only evacuate from the engine room to the muster point. There was no clear plan for carrying out the search and had not been effectively exercised. For reasons unknown, the two-man entry teams separated inside the engine room rather than remaining together. As we can see here, barriers are only effective if we all take responsibility and keep them in place. This will prevent an incident. You need to understand the barriers that you are responsible for and keep them effective. Is it equipment that really fails? You maintain effective barriers. You prevent the incident.